The room was quiet in a way that felt heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Outside the tall glass windows of the hospital in Riyadh, the city glowed with wealth and power, lights stretching endlessly into the desert night. Inside, a group of senior administrators stood around a polished table, speaking in low, confident tones. When her name was mentioned, someone chuckled softly. Not cruelly, just enough to sting. A Filipino nurse, they said, from a provincial hospital back home. Skilled, yes, but replaceable. One of many. Nothing special. She stood just outside the door, hands folded, head slightly bowed, pretending not to hear. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes safer than defense. That moment, brief and dismissive, carried a message she had heard many times before. You are here to serve, not to matter. What no one in that room understood was that the man who would soon challenge their assumptions was not a manager, not a supervisor, not even part of the hospital staff. He was a Saudi prince. And at that very moment, his private jet was already being prepared. The nurse's story did not begin in a palace or a luxury ward. It began years earlier in a small Filipino town where hospitals were understaffed, shifts were long, and gratitude often came in the form of a quiet smile from a patient who had nothing else to give. She had learned to work through exhaustion, to pray in silence before dawn shifts, to treat every patient as family because that was how she had been raised. In her world, dignity was not demanded, it was lived. In Saudi Arabia, however, the world ran on hierarchy. Titles mattered. Nationalities mattered. Some passports opened doors automatically. Others were expected to wait. She was assigned to a ward that handled high-profile patients, important names, important families. It was an honor, they said, though the tone suggested it was also a test. She did her job the way she always had. Carefully, gently, without drawing attention. When she spoke, she chose her words with respect. When she moved, it was with quiet purpose. Then one night, everything changed. A patient under her care was not just wealthy, he was royal. A member of the ruling family, guarded closely, spoken to carefully, surrounded by people who measured every word. Doctors came and went, specialists offered opinions. Yet it was the nurse from the Philippines who noticed the smallest changes. The way his breathing shifted. The way his hand tightened in discomfort before the monitors showed anything unusual. She acted without hesitation. Calm. Focused. She called for assistance at exactly the right moment, not too early to cause alarm, not too late to cause regret. The crisis passed. The room exhaled. Later, when the prince was stable, he asked a simple question. Who was the nurse who stayed when everyone else hesitated? That question traveled far beyond the hospital walls. It reached a place where decisions were made quickly and absolutely, and when the prince learned she had quietly returned to her modest staff housing at the edge of the city, he paused. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone the world overlooks becomes essential to someone with the power to change everything? Because that night, a single act of competence and compassion planted a seed. And soon, an order would be given that no one could have imagined. They did not know it yet, but the real story was only beginning. To understand why what happened next felt unbelievable, you have to understand the invisible weight many Filipinos carry when they step into foreign lands. For decades, the global image of Filipino workers has been framed narrowly. Caregivers, helpers, support staff. Reliable, yes, but rarely recognized as exceptional. The world grew comfortable seeing Filipinos as the backbone, never the headline. In the Middle East, this perception was even more rigid. Entire systems were built on the assumption that some people lead, while others quietly follow. Filipinos were known for their kindness, their patience, their faith, but rarely were they associated with authority or influence. Their excellence was expected, not celebrated. The nurse felt this from her first day, the way instructions were delivered slowly, as if she might not understand. The way praise was given sparingly, while mistakes from others were excused easily. In meetings, her presence was functional, not valued. She was there to execute, not to contribute. Her first weeks were filled with small tests, long shifts that stretched past what was reasonable, patients others preferred not to handle, comments disguised as jokes about accents or food back home, none of it loud enough to complain about, all of it sharp enough to hurt. There were moments she questioned herself. Standing alone in the corridor during night shifts, the echo of her footsteps reminding her how far she was from home. She missed the sound of Tagalog spoken freely. She missed her family. She missed being seen. But she carried something with her that no one else could measure. Years of experience gained under pressure. The ability to remain steady when resources were limited. The discipline formed by knowing that in her country, failure often had consequences far beyond a performance review. She did not talk about the patients she had helped survive against impossible odds. She did not mention the awards pinned quietly inside a drawer back home. She did not speak of the times she had prayed over patients because there was nothing else left to offer but hope and skill. And so when she was assigned to the royal ward, many assumed it was coincidence, or luck, or convenience. The prince, however, began to ask questions. He noticed how she spoke to him, not with fear, not with false confidence, but with sincerity. He noticed that when others rushed, she observed. When others followed protocol blindly, she listened to what the body was saying. He noticed she treated him not as royalty, but as a human being entrusted to her care. One evening, he asked her where she learned to work that way. She answered simply, "From home." That word lingered. Behind closed doors, discussions began. Backgrounds were checked, records reviewed. The truth surfaced quietly but clearly. This nurse had handled emergencies that would have overwhelmed many elite hospitals. She had done it without resources, without recognition, without complaint. Still, no one expected what would happen next. The prince's condition required a specialized procedure available only in another city. The logistics were complex. Security, timing, discretion. Many names were proposed to accompany him. Then the prince made his choice. He wanted the Filipino nurse. The room fell silent. Some exchanged looks. Others hesitated, unsure how to respond. Bringing a foreign nurse on a royal flight was unheard of, and yet the decision stood. As preparations began, she was called into an office. The words were formal, but the meaning felt unreal. She was to be transported immediately. A private jet would arrive within hours. She nodded, still unsure if this was truly happening. Outside, engines were warming. Inside, a truth was about to confront every assumption they had ever held. Everyone was waiting to see if this decision was a mistake. The airport was quiet in the way only private terminals are. No crowds, no announcements, just polished floors and controlled movement. When she stepped onto the tarmac, the heat of the night air wrapped around her, and she froze for a moment at the sight before her. The jet stood gleaming under the lights, massive and unmistakably royal. She adjusted her uniform, feeling suddenly aware of how small she seemed in that space. No one spoke to her dismissively now. Staff nodded with respect. Protocol shifted subtly around her presence. As she boarded, something inside her steadied. This was not about status. It was about responsibility. Someone's life depended on her focus. Inside the aircraft, the prince acknowledged her with a quiet nod. No spectacle, no announcement, just trust. During the flight, a complication arose. Subtle at first, a change in rhythm that machines barely caught. She noticed immediately, moved smoothly, communicated clearly. Her actions were precise, confident, rooted in years of instinct sharpened by necessity. The medical team watched closely. No one questioned her now. They followed. By the time they landed, the situation was under control. In the hours that followed, word spread. Not loudly, but unmistakably. The Filipino nurse had performed flawlessly under pressure few ever faced, not once, but consistently. In the hospital that received them, senior doctors asked for her input. Administrators listened when she spoke. Her assessments were accurate. Her calm reassured everyone in the room. What unfolded was not dramatic in the way movies portray heroism. There were no raised voices or grand gestures. Just competence meeting consequence. And slowly, something shifted. The looks changed first, then the tone, then the assumptions quietly dissolved. The prince recovered well. When he was finally able to speak freely, he requested a meeting. Not with the doctors, not with the administrators, with her. He thanked her simply. Then he said something that would travel far beyond that room. He said he had never felt more safe in a hospital before. The weight of those words settled heavily, not because they were loud, but because of who spoke them. Respect replaced doubt. Curiosity replaced prejudice. And the story of a Filipino nurse began to move through halls where such stories rarely entered. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Because the prince decided to speak publicly. And when he did, the world listened. The statement was brief, but its impact was immediate. The prince spoke of professionalism, of trust, of excellence found where many never thought to look. He spoke of a nurse from the Philippines whose skill and composure had made all the difference. There was no exaggeration, no flattery, just acknowledgement. In a world where recognition often follows power, this recognition traveled in reverse, from the highest seat to the quietest corner. The reaction was swift. Hospital leadership reevaluated policies. Filipino staff noticed a shift in how they were addressed. Invitations to speak, to contribute, to lead. Not because of charity, but because competence had been proven undeniable. Back home, the story reached the Philippines. Families shared it quietly at first, then proudly. It was not about luxury or royalty. It was about dignity. Filipinos understood immediately why this mattered, because it reflected something they had always known, but rarely seen affirmed on a global stage. That resilience, humility, and excellence were woven deeply into their identity. The nurse returned to her routine, same uniform, same gentle manner. But the world around her had changed. Doors opened, voices softened, respect became visible. When asked how it felt to be chosen, she answered with characteristic simplicity. She said she was only doing what she was trained to do. Care. That answer, more than the jet or the title, revealed the truth. Filipinos excel not because they seek recognition, but because they carry responsibility deeply, because they understand service not as weakness, but as strength, because faith teaches them that every action matters, even when no one is watching. The prince later said something quietly to those around him, that the Philippines had given the world more than workers. It had given the world guardians. And in that moment, the story no longer belonged to one nurse. It belonged to millions who had waited to be seen. Sometimes, all it takes is one person with power to recognize truth. And when that happens, an entire nation rises with quiet pride.